Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing our Cao Cao Let's Talk Lore series as we pick things up for episode 5 of Act 2, titled Splitting Ways. So last episode, we ended with the formation of the Guangdong Coalition, but in order to better understand its impact, we need to take a look at the map to better assess both the strength of the Guangdong Coalition and how Dong Zhuo will deal with these threats. So right off the bat, we have Dong Zhuo and his troops garrisoned in the capital city of Luoyang. And although it's uncertain how many men he had under his command at this time, as the exact number of local troops he had actually absorbed is questionable, as segments of those forces did manage to escape, with some of the coalition members, such as Yuan Shu, for example, were able to get groups of their troops, like his Rapid Tiger infantry, out of the capital before they were absorbed into Dong Zhuo's forces. But even by a conservative measurement, Dong Zhuo should have around 50,000 men at the very least under his command. And in addition to his troops, the city of Luoyang is also located in a very good defensive terrain. There are rivers and gate passes that surround it that provides it a lot of defensive advantages, as that's why it was picked as the capital. But even with these advantages, the coalition still was a huge threat, as if you take a look at the development of the coalition, the chain of events kicked off with Cao Mao forging a letter in Dong. Then almost immediately, the forces of the Yan province banded together as its first group garrisoned their troop in a nearby town called Suanzao. And this is where we would find our main character Cao Cao and his 5,000 fresh recruits, alongside the likes of Zhang Miao, Bao Xin, Qiao Mao, and Liu Dai. Then the next group that rallied to the cause is located in the north, as Yuan Shao was able to gain support of other administrators in the Ji province as they rallied their forces against Dong Zhuo, and their group garrisoned across from the Yellow River due north of the capital in Henei. And their actions even forced Han Fu, who Dong Zhuo had originally promoted to keep an eye on Yuan Shao, to give up his position there and also throw in his lot with the coalition, as he decided to station himself a bit farther back in Ye to help facilitate supplies for the frontline troops. Then farther south, Yuan Shu, who is Yuan Shao's brother or cousin, depending on which time frame you're using, also managed to escape from the capital with his Rapid Tiger troops, as he was the general of the left, and he rallied Sun Jian, who was an administrator in Changsha at this time, and the two of them murdered both the inspector of the Jin province and the administrator of Nanyang, as they would complete the setup on the southern flank of the coalition as they garrisoned their troop in Luoyang. And to the north of them, Kong Zhou, who was the inspector of the Yong province, figured that he might as well join this coalition given his position. So at this point, the encirclement of Luoyang was complete. But of course, there's still a ton of issues within this coalition, as none of them individually had a force that could match Dong Zhuo's. And most critically for a lot of them, their forces were rather green, as most of them are newly recruited militias, as is the case with Cao Cao's force. And even so, their threat was a real one, and Dong Zhuo made plans to deal with them, as he realized that beyond his advantages in military strength, his ultimate trump card is that he had the emperor, as without the emperor, he would just be another warlord with some men going against the world. But with the emperor, he is the official regent, who can command Han loyalists, as he can paint the coalition members as traitors and rebels. So in order to keep his trump card safe, he made plans to move the emperor away from Luoyang, as it was located simply too close to the coalition and too far away from his source of power in the Liang province, where he held. Therefore, the best solution for Dong Zhuo was to move the capital from Luoyang to Chang'an, which happens to be the old capital of the Western Han dynasty. So within a month of the coalition's formation, Dong Zhuo brought up his ideas to the court, but right away the court shot him down. So Dong Zhuo replaced the court, as all the Grand Excellencies, including the like of Huang Wan and Yang Biao, were dismissed, And even his close advisors who went against this, including the likes of Zhou Bi and Wu Qiong, who had been the ones who had originally decided to give all these inspectors and administrators away as the olive branch to these powerful clans, who are now backfired as all these administrators and inspectors are now united in this coalition against Dong Zhuo. And they were promptly executed by Dong Zhuo for their failed plan. And in their place, a new batch of officials were promoted. And in all honesty, Dong Zhuo didn't pack the courts with his men, as instead he tried to promote well-respected scholars who had lost their positions during the Second Party incident way back to the eunuchs, and they were given key imperial court positions as they were very well respected. They commanded a presence that Dong Zhuo could not rally himself, and these included the likes of Cai Yong and most critically Wang Yun. And it is under the guidance of this group that in February of 190, the imperial court and the emperor officially migrated to Chang'an, setting up court there and moving the capital of the Eastern Han Dynasty all the way back to the original capital in the Western Han Dynasty. And at the same time, to eliminate the Han forces in Chang'an who could potentially set up a coup against Dong Zhuo, who had remained in Luoyang, Dong Zhuo summoned back their commanding general, who happens to be Huang Fusong. And Huang Fusong had been stationed there since the early days of the Liang Rebellion, and he remained there even after Dong Zhuo had left that post. And here is where the history books might have changed, as if Huang Fusong had made the choice against honoring his oath to the Han dynasty and the emperor himself and decided to also join in this coalition, then he would have finished the western front against Dong Zhuo and completely surrounded Dong Zhuo, and thus essentially eliminating him. But honor would do him in, as Huang Fusong did not want to turn his sword against the Han court and thus the emperor, or at least symbolically against the emperor, as the coalition members were definitely painted as traitors. Therefore, he surrendered his command post and returned to Luoyang, where he was promptly imprisoned and almost killed because he had multiple feuds with Dong Zhuo all the way back to the early days of the Yellow Turban Rebellion. But luckily, Huang Fusong's son pleaded for his life and he was allowed to live under Dong Zhuo's reign. And with Huang Fusong and the west out of the way and secured, the emperor safely relocated to Chang'an, and Dong Zhuo was free to deal with the coalition, which had surprisingly remained in a holding pattern well into the spring of 190, even though many expected them to have launched their attack, as the situation within the coalition was a bit weird, as no one wanted to make the first move against Dong Zhuo, as they all knew that their individual strength did not match Dong Zhuo's elite forces that he had brought from the west. And since no one's in this rebellion for altruistic reasons, no one wanted to sacrifice their own force, as each warlord was in this coalition in order to secure a piece of the spoils once Dong Zhuo falls. And in order for them to eventually claim this piece, they needed to be alive and also need to maintain a sizable force at the end of this conflict in order to fight for their peace to be a bit bigger. So no one wanted to waste their force on making it easier for the others to finish off Dong Zhuo, and therefore no one made a move. And instead, Dong Zhuo made the first move, as he would spend the first few months burning down the capital, looting the imperial tombs, and gathering up the wealth of the private citizens, as he too was planning to retreat back to Chang'an, and he didn't want to leave behind anything for the coalition to grab, as he envisioned this long-term West versus East conflict in the coming years. So while the coalition sat on their hands, Luoyang burned, and finally Cao Cao had enough, as he grew disillusioned with their lot, as he decided to become the first one to make such a move, as he marched his 5,000 men against Dong Zhuo. In response, Dong Zhuo sent Xu Rong and around 25,000 men to meet them, and these two forces would clash around a town called Xingyang, where both the numerical disadvantages and the experience disadvantages between Cao Cao and Dong Zhuo's forces would do Cao Cao in, as Cao Cao's forces were completely crushed in this battle. Arrows rained down the battlefield as both Cao Cao and his horse were struck. And while he laid injured on the battlefield, awaiting a sure death, his younger cousin, Cao Hong, would come to his rescue, as Cao Hong would give up his own horse for Cao Cao, as he would protect him on foot during their retreat. And thanks to Cao Cao's dear friend Zhang Miao, who was the only one from the coalition to eventually send some of his own men under the command of Wei Zi, who was the man who originally financed Cao Cao's troops in the first place, to come and reinforce Cao Cao. Cao Hong was able to find an opening during this reinforcement period to escort Cao Cao away from the battlefield, and he would eventually find a raft in the river as he would ferry both of them to safety. Unfortunately for Wei Zi and the reinforcement, they would all perish in the fighting, as Xu Rong's men eliminated all the enemies on the field and dealt a crushing first blow against the coalition. And when Cao Cao finally made it back to camp, he was greeted by the condescending faces of the other members, as behind their fake condolences hid the feeling of "I told you so," as they now will use Cao Cao's defeat as another reason to avoid any offensive action. Defeated and without an army that he can call his own, Cao Cao tried to reach out to his old friend in the north in Yuanshao, but Yuanshao's situation was not any better, as after Dong Zhuo tasted early success against the coalition, he would order his own forces north in a summer offense of their own, as they successfully dislodged Yuanshao and Wang Quan from their positions in Henei, as the coalition took farther losses. And by the fall, Xu Rong would once again defeat Sun Jian in the field on the southern front as well, as all three fronts of the coalition failed to make any gains in their first year together. Then, to make matter worse, by the winter of 190, the coalition was officially falling apart, as the years spent outside their individual jurisdictions only encouraged unrest throughout the land, as the Black Mountain Bandits, under the command of Zhang Yan, extended their influence well beyond the Black Mountains. As they entered the heartland, they sieged down the city of Ye, forcing Han Fu back and cutting off some of the supplies for the coalition. Then the bandits spread farther south, even across the Yellow River, as even commanderies like Dong were getting attacked by bandits. So everyone in the coalition wanted to retreat home for the winter and take care of these unrest. And to make the matter even worse, the dispute that existed between Qiao Mao and his boss Liu Dai had finally boiled over during this year that they had spent together in the camp at Suanzhao. As even before the group got together, we talked about how Qiao Mao being a well-established figure in the Yan province and a sort of figurehead for the one who had launched the coalition, and his new boss, Liu Dai, who comes from the imperial bloodline as a distant relative to the emperor, and as the new inspector, but someone who was appointed by Dong Zhuo, so there was a little disrespect there between the local clans and him, and the two of them clashed often. And just before the group disbanded for the winter, their feud got physical, as Liu Dai eventually killed Qiao Mao and seized the Dong commandery. And in the midst of all this chaos, Cao Cao, who had just recovered from his injuries, decided to leave and head south to the Yang province in hope to recruit a new army for himself. But this time, he was not going to return to the coalition, as he had seen enough and was now officially ready to go solo. And with this, we're going to end our episode and also Act 2 of Cao Cao's story here. And when we return, we'll kick off Act 3 and tell the story of how Cao Cao's restart here would eventually carry him to become the last prime minister of the Han Dynasty. Now, hopefully you all enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you then. Bye!